think what we've come to realize around these parts is that the day that the portal closes should be a college football holiday. That's what we're celebrating today on Monday Smash. Alongside the managing editor of Warchant.com, he is Irish Novell. My name is Tom Lang, and we welcome you to the Portal Closure Show. Are you feeling the closure, folks, out there? We hope you are. Thank you for joining us on Warchant TV. Everywhere that you're watching, throw us a like underneath this video, subscribe. Ira, how are you feeling this evening? You're the busiest of us all in these types of matters.
Yeah, I don't know about that, man. We're all sharing the load, but no, it's good. It's and again, I think like you and Jeff talked about on the show today, and Jeff Cameron show, that it feels like they came out okay. I mean, it's probably not perfect. It's there are a couple of players you'd probably like to have back, but nothing that you feel like changes the win loss total, especially after you think about like the situation last week with Josh Farmer and whether or not that would impact Darrell Jackson. And like those were real huge consequences if that didn't go right. And that did go right for Florida State, at least for now. And so, I think, if you're Mike Norvell, you got to feel like you came out of it okay.
Something that we learn, Ira, as we work in the business. You've been doing this for a long time. I'm now entering around 15 years working covering college sports. You learn pretty fast how the sausage is made. It's not always the most fun thing in the world to learn because there's this way that we idolize sports and there's an innocence to it. But as you learn, you appreciate the things that are kind of nasty about the business, but it's still one of the great jobs in the world. Somebody that I know put it as you're working in the toy department of life when you're working in sports. But fans got to see a little bit of how the sausage is made last week with the Farmer situation. In the NIL collectives, the Battle's End of the world that work for all different college football programs across the country deal with these types of situations behind closed doors often. And for this one to play out in front of the public, I think now the Florida State fan base has a greater sense of kind of how much chaos that you have to navigate through in this new world of the NIL. And we got to see it play out publicly last week.
Yeah, it's kind of a weird deal because, generally there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, even before the NIL period, before, this new world of the transfer portal, going back, like you said, covering college sports for, I'm going on 30 years now. It's actually over 30 years now. There's always been stuff behind the scenes but you don't report it always. And a lot of it's just because it's just the normal stuff that goes on that isn't necessarily, there's not necessarily news, like a player's dissatisfied. To me, that might be a story in the NFL, might be a story in the NBA. In college sports, that's kind of been stuff we just haven't got involved with because we're dealing with kids. You're dealing with 18 to 22-year-old kids for the most part. And is it really, I don't know if fair is the right word, but do we really need to put all their business out there in the street? They're making youthful decisions. Think about the things we did as 18 to 20 to 21-year-olds. And if all that got put out there, that would be awful. And it's stuff we would have probably got for years. What's changed things now to some degree is now we're talking about NIL and we're talking about big money and there's negotiations and all that. So that feels a little bit different from the fan base standpoint. They probably feel like they've got more of a vested interest because they may be donating to these collectives and they feel like they're a stakeholder. And then the other part of it was why this one became so public last week, of course, with Josh Farmer, because he took it to social media and, said he was going to go in the portal 2 days before he actually went in the portal. He's retweeting tweets from Georgia about their defensive line and the guys in the NFL draft. So he kind of, whether it's for leveraging and negotiations or whatever it was, he was putting it out there publicly. And so that kind of created a whole different situation. And, I don't know. It's something that we have to talk about. I think I texted with you and a couple of people on the staff that we may need to have to consider how we cover these things because I would prefer not to. Again, I still feel like we're talking about 18 to 22-year-old kids, but I don't know that how long we can continue to do that with it becoming more of a professional model.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. I think the reason that I would hesitate to report on a lot of these things is they get resolved before it really is a lingering issue. And that was something that, in the Farmer case, I think there have been situations that are akin to the back and forth with Josh Farmer that have played out behind the scenes before. I mean, in these last few months. Now, the kid didn't go to social media. I think that's the differentiator. The moment that they take it public, it's a story for better or worse. But I think, the Battle's End and other collectives around the country, the Southeast footprint, especially where they really care about football, they put out fires like this all the time. It's just that, again, folks. If you wanted to know what it's like to work for one of those agencies, here's what it is. And so if you want to help them make it smooth out, you can go to battlesend.com and do that as a Noles fan. But regardless of that, Ira, to keep Josh Farmer, by extension, to keep Darrell Jackson, even though I don't know where he really could have gone or how he
Yeah,
could.
he may have stayed no matter what, but it's just, could have been a collateral situation.
And it could have been something where if he's disgruntled and that upsets the apple cart in the locker room, like that was a huge win. You didn't know that it could be lost, but the moment that it seemed like it was going the other way, Ira, it almost, in a way, Florida State won in the portal by retaining. And then, like you said, the guys that ended up departing, not critical blows to the two deep. And now it opens up the conversation for Florida State, in which how many spots are left. That is not to be at this point. I don't think that's a finalized number. Briley asked that today. I got to give Briley credit. He was so ready for the smash, Ira. He wrote in at 1:04 p.m. to put a couple of questions out there, calling himself out for the obsession too. Any rumblings about portal departures? But the second part of his question and the second comment he made: do we have an accurate count on spots available? I'd say roughly a handful at this point. It's hard to know precisely. Ira, you point this out all the time because sometimes schollies are handed out that we don't know about semester to semester.
Yeah, I think it's around 4 or 5, somewhere in there. We're not sure exactly. Because again, there's a couple players there's at least one that's very high profile. Dante Anderson, when he signed with Florida State, it was reported that he was preferred walk on, but Florida State actually announced him as the part of their signing class. So it may have been a situation where at one point he was preferred walk on, then he got put on scholarship, or perhaps he didn't. And the other thing is, there's a lot of guys that go on that are walk-ons who actually get all of their school paid for through Bright Futures. I think CJ Campbell's an example of that from what we understand. He's an academic scholar. He's got financial aid, so he's a walk-on, but he gets everything paid for. So they don't have to call him on scholarship. They can use that scholarship for somebody else. But, at some point they may switch. They may put him on scholarship. Trayshawn Ward was a great example. Trayshawn Ward was a walk-on. He got put on scholarship. And for months, we kept calling him a walk-on. It turned out he'd already been put on scholarship. But Mike Norvell doesn't make those things public. Some coaches like to celebrate it. They have the video cameras come in, they announce it in the meeting, and they do a big spectacle, and the coach gets to be the hero. And you would think Mike Norvell might like that because he was a walk-on, and he values those guys greatly. But I think he doesn't want it to become about him and a spectacle, so they keep it all private. So it's hard to know exactly. Long story short, my guess is around 4 or 5. And there could be 1 or 2 more. I mean, there's while the portal window closed, there is always the option that graduate transfers could still leave. That's always a possibility. We don't expect it, but it could happen.
Tonight on Monday Smash, it's going to be a night that's driven largely by you out there in the chat. So if you have questions for us, please feel free to fire away. We see a couple of them already in there. Do us also a favor, hit the like button beneath this video, subscribe to Warchant TV, absolutely free. And if you want, hit the bell. You'll be alerted every time that there's either breaking news or a live show. So we go to Eric Angel, one of the pillars, who is asking the question. I think we've done several videos about this at this point now because it's the hot topic of the offseason. Articles on the website side of warchant.com. Who the hell, and Eric, I'm injecting this, who the hell is going to play safety? And is there anyone in the transfer portal when it reopens? So we know that there are a couple of veterans, and I'm going to call Shaheem Brown at this point, Ira, a veteran in the mix, but they need more bodies at that position, don't they?
Yeah, Akeem Dent and Shaheem Brown are your projected safe starters. That's who we'd expect. Akeem Dent's basically like a 2 or 3 year starter, and Shaheem Brown started some last year when they had injuries. So those are your starters. And then behind them, really now, your top 2 backups left. Travis Shea and Amarian Cooper both bailed. Amarian Cooper announced today he's going to Colorado. We don't know where Travis Shea is going to go yet, but now behind them, the only other safety you had on scholarship this spring was KJ Kirkland, a true freshman early enrollee. You've got a couple more freshmen coming in. Conrad Hussey and Jabril Rawls. So you've got 3 freshmen and 2 veteran safeties. And my guess is they're going to try to get a couple more. The one that we've all been talking about, Jalen Key out of UAB, he's coming on an official visit this weekend. He's on an official visit right now at Ole Miss. Those may be the 2 top players. There's 6 schools mentioned. Alabama's even in there. He's a high demand, established college safety. He's from Tallahassee. There's a lot of connections there. I think Florida State feels like they've got a great shot to get him. If they don't get him, there's not a ton of great safeties out there. They may have to wait for maybe some grad transfers to enter the portal.
I think that's a great point. Always remember, it's not about immediately filling these voids. So you don't have to hit the panic button yet if Florida State doesn't get the key kid. Graduate transfers, they sit on their own clock. They are not, beholden to waiting or getting into that 2 week window in the spring. When they graduate, when they complete their undergraduate studies, they can leave at any point. It might be somebody who's already wrapped up by a semester and he's opining whether or not to enter the portal, or they still got exams to go to complete their undergraduate studies in the next month, and then they can enter into the portal in the summer. So this window extends for guys who are graduate transfers all the way into the summer. I believe that's how they got Dylan Gibbons. Do I recall that properly? I think he completed
I
it.
don't know that they had that window in the spring at that point. I think
Yeah.
it was at that point it might have been just a fair game. But like last year, Jackson Turnitime was a grad transfer who went in like in the middle of the summer. I think Florida State brought him in. They brought him in right before camp. I was wondering, Ben, if you're watching, if you could get the tweet I tweeted earlier today with the list, and Warchant retweeted it, of the players who've left Florida State since the end of last season.
Mhm.
That's the other thing. It's like 7 players entered the portal during this period, these 2 weeks. They've lost 22 players since the end of last season, which,
Yeah.
it kind of stuns you when you hear that number, right? I mean, because this isn't the first year of this coaching staff or they're cleaning house or whatever. This is just the natural order of business
Yep.
in 2023. 22 players have gone into the portal since the Florida game.
Yeah, there's the list right there on the screen. Good job, Ben. Director Ben also enjoying. He puts the question in the chat, what's everyone drinking on tonight? He is most certainly in his 20s because he's got whiskey and Dr. Pepper, strawberries and cream or some such thing. Ira, at some point the wisdom kicks in, but in your 20s, that sounds very much, it is not good. I imagine so. That sounds very on brand for somebody in their 20s.
Ben's at the mode of what would whiskey go good with, and just try to figure it out, and just we're doing a little trial by error. So good luck with that, Ben. Thanks for the report.
Soon, buddy, it'll be whiskey on the rocks and then whiskey neat. You'll get there, buddy. But here's the list. 3 wide receivers, Ira. The Malik McClain one, as time goes on, I think is feels more and more significant because he seemed to be trending in the right direction. Trayshawn Ward wasn't going to have the carry count. We understand that, but he was low-key MVP of the bowl game for Florida State. A lot of defensive linemen, and a lot of defensive backs as well. Look at that list.
Look at all those DBs.
Yeah, I mean, that is something else. And McCall being a high-profile recruit. Omarion was a 4-star as well. Travis J was a blue chipper. Sidney Williams, Ira, actually, oddly enough, I wish that they had him back in the rotation.
I swear that was one of the reasons I did this list, was because I was thinking about Sidney Williams. I was like, he was like a real subtle departure that nobody talked about at the time. But, man, you'd kind of like to have Sidney Williams hanging around.
In that safety rotation, he and McClellan, I always thought, man, those guys are solid. And McClellan obviously had to leave. But, yeah, that's this is a group that they can withstand this list that you see before you, folks. Florida State can. But there's a couple of guys there that you wish you could have. I think if we had to list it, Ira, for me personally, it'd be McClain and maybe McClendon. I think at defensive end, if you were assured that you had a top 4 guy in that rotation, that'd probably be better than they sit right now, at least at defensive end. How about you? If you could pull back a couple of those guys, who would they be?
Yeah, probably. I don't know. I don't know if I'd go McClain. I think they're going to be okay at receiver. The thing about Trayshawn is, I just love Trayshawn. I thought he was great for the locker room, and it seemed fine in the spring. It didn't seem like they lost anything with him. I mean, Trey Benson's got a great personality. I think those guys have, it's a good group. But I think Trayshawn Ward, there's a lot of heart there. So I'd like to have him, even though I'm not sure how many carries he would get with those guys they have in the backfield now. And then I think, I think you're right. I think McClendon, because of they'd really be benefit from having another established pass rusher. And then, maybe I don't know. That's probably about it that I'd really be too concerned about.
Yeah.
I mean, right? I mean, not to kill those guys, but
no, I think you're correct with Trayshawn, especially just because he blended with Benson so well, straight ahead. And if you got guys with happy feet or ball security issues, you just plug Trayshawn in there and not worry about either of those things.
Right. But it's just interesting. And again, I think this is kind of the new normal. And, they had to have that to some degree because they didn't have a lot of seniors last year. And if you were going to go out and sign, I think they signed 17 or 18 high school players. 10 or so portal guys. They're probably going to add a couple. So you're trying to bring in 30 new players. You didn't have a lot of seniors, so you had to have this attrition. So some of it's, by design, but a lot of it's, guys realizing that they're not going to be starters or used the way they want to be used. And, you hope the best. Like Amari Gaynor, yeah, it would be awesome if he finds a role at North Carolina where he can flourish. It just wasn't going to happen in this defense. And I'm kind of glad that he saw that because maybe he's got a chance to go make money in the NFL. And I don't know that he would have if he stayed here.
Yeah, another guy, Brendan Gant, to me would be somebody that just for situations and special teams that he could be when you're trying to find those little things in the margin to help put you over the top to a playoff. It's guys like that that can help you get there. You don't think about them, but then you think about the details of downing a punt or making a play in coverage, and it might be only out there for 5 snaps, 10 snaps a game, but they can be impactful. Island Chief asks, to that end, we just looked at the list and we just considered those names. Which side on FSU's roster got hurt more by this portal? We'll go with the most recent window, offense or defense. What do you think?
I think the answer of both is probably defense. I mean, I don't feel, and again, this isn't a slight on Micah Pittman, but I felt like the only thing I really wanted for Micah Pittman was like maybe if he got over this hip surgery and came back, maybe there's another gear there that wasn't there because of the hip injury. Because I think he played with that hip injury all season. And so maybe if he came back 100% and like maybe that unlocks something with him. But I wasn't real impressed with him as a guy that do more than catch. He caught physical passes, like contested catches over the middle. That was a positive. He was obviously a good punt returner, but he wasn't a guy that was going to stretch the field. He wasn't a guy that was going to make a ton of yards after the catch. So from that standpoint, I feel like they've got other weapons that can do those things, assuming they take care of the punt returning situation. And then Malik McClain, I get, from a measurable standpoint, I'm with you. I agree. I don't know, man. I feel like Kentron can do what Malik did.
Yeah. Listen, I'm very high on 88. I like him
Yeah.
as, even before the spring game performance, when we saw practice for practice, is he the most consistent guy in the world? No, but does he have the flashes of exactly what you need to be a complimentary number 2? I think so. It's just that McClain seemed to be reaching another level of confidence, and that's what this is largely about in college. Once you establish your confidence, these guys come to Florida State, especially now under Mike Norvell, for a reason. They have the profile. Noel Fan 1893 chimes in, that he's going to miss Trayshawn Ward. We'll see what happens. This is going to be an interesting first month of the season, Ira. Of course, you've got the huge game against LSU in Orlando. Everybody's counting down the days. I saw Eric Angel counting down the days in the chat. I think he reminds us during every live show how many there are before kickoff against LSU. And then the test for Clemson in week 4 on the road. It's a different type of animal. What do you think, as we sit here today, Florida State's coaching staff is looking at the most in terms of improving beyond safety? Safety's a given. We've touched on that. But if they're looking to tinker and make themselves as ready-made as they possibly can be for that first month of the season, where do you think they might go in that portal? Where do you think that they're looking to make sure that they upgrade and or maximize?
I think it's more defensive end than linebacker. I know Jeff is all about the linebackers. I just feel like, I think Byron Turner's got potential. I think they've got some other young defensive ends that have potential. But really, I don't know that you can feel good about anybody other than those top 3. You feel great about Jared Verse. You feel really good about Patrick Payton. You feel good about Gilbert Edmond. And then there's a lot of question marks. So I feel like defensive end's a position where you want to be rotating. You don't want those guys playing 60, 70 snaps. So I think that's the spot. And if you have any injuries, obviously you're in trouble. So to me, I'd put a premium on defensive end if you can get a pass rusher. And the good thing about pass rushers is I don't know you have to have super experienced guys. Like I think, if you're talking about like a linebacker, maybe you want somebody that's kind of, man, he's just played a lot of snaps. He's seen it all. He can diagnose stuff. But man, if you've got an athlete that you can put on the edge and go get the quarterback, you can put them in the rotation. So the only way I would back off that is if they feel great about Jaden Jones. Like to me, he is the wild card, junior college transfer, coming off of an ACL. If they feel like, man, he is so far past the measuring sticks or the marks that they had to get to in his recovery to where they know he's going to be ready. He looks the part, dude. Was he 6'6"? I mean, he looks like a big time pass rusher. We don't know how he is physically.
I would also say that, if I'm assessing some of the backups at edge, I don't know about Byron Turner. I'm going to put the jury out on that one.
Yeah.
I think in if you're talking about situational, it's obvious passing, and you just want to put an athlete out there. I don't think Lamont Green is that far away from being
Yeah.
keyboard in that specific situation. He's not
He,
large enough, Ira, to
yeah.
handle down in and down out. I'm not going to dispute that. But if you're just talking about the quicks,
Yeah.
I'm very impressed with what I saw specific to that in spring camp. It looks like you would agree.
I'm glad you brought him up. Yeah, it's funny because if an offensive tackle gets their hands on him, it's going to be trouble. I
Yes.
mean, he's not going to have much of a defense there. But but I mean, they could just throw him into the next zip code. But yeah, the speed is there. There's no question. I mean, like it pops at you much the same way that Patrick Payton did 3 years ago. When Patrick Payton walked on campus, you knew, man, he's nowhere near as what he needs to be, but you could see the flashes, and you see him with him. Byron Turner, I just wanted to touch on him real quick. He just hasn't played enough. He's been here for 2 years, so it feels like, okay, going into year 3, you should be ready, but he hasn't played. The first year he was coming back from shoulder surgery. Then last year he pulled his hamstring during the season and missed a ton of time. So I think the thing with him is you see him there. You'll see the flash plays. We saw him in practices the day at Doak. I think he had a couple of nice plays,
Yep.
but then he'll lose contain, and the quarterback's, AJ Duffy's running for a 40-yard gain. It's just stuff like that. Again, I just think it's game reps. So I think he's got potential. It's just I don't know how, like, you wouldn't feel comfortable, I don't think, putting him out there in those first 4 games, because you have those 2 huge games against LSU and Clemson. So that would be my concern. Where do you feel? I mean, I feel like defensive end. Where would you go?
I think it can be mitigated somewhat, and T. Swifty, we'll get to that question because it is related to the position group in just a moment. But I think it can be mitigated somewhat. This was off the table for a moment there with Farmer potentially leaving, and who knows if there was an implication somewhere else. But now that Farmer has been retained and all is calmed down in the defensive interior, I mean, Adam Fuller's talked about having multiple defensive interior lineman fronts, multiple
True.
defensive tackle fronts. And Dennis Briggs is a name that 100% resonates in that situation. Braden Fisk has played all over the line on defense as well. And I think Farmer would be capable of it too, Ira. So I think early downs, if you don't want to put Peyton out there because he's more of a specialist for the pass rush against an LSU who can really maul and run the football, or against Clemson, who's probably going to want to do that with a freshman quarterback.
Right.
I mean, Klubnik made some starts last year, but this is going to be the real first year for him. I think that's one way to mitigate the weakness in depth and to go make sure that you've got enough reps out there to keep Peyton fresh, to keep Jared Verse as fresh as possible, and certainly Gilbert Edmonds. So if I was going to make an argument that they could go elsewhere outside of edge, it would be because they have so many different types of interior defensive linemen that they can put an edge setter out there on first and second down to save up for the big reps that you need, from a Patrick Peyton. So that would be.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. And yeah, like you said, Adam Fuller has said they may go with 4 defensive tackles. Well, like players that we consider defensive tackles, they could have 4 of them out there on the field together. So yeah, that's a good point. But going back to linebacker, I just feel like I know I'm in the minority, but I feel like I think DJ Lundy's a solid number 3, and I think Omar Graham's probably a solid number 4. So I feel like they're okay at linebacker.
Yeah, I think Omar had a good final couple of weeks of camp. We all touched on it in little notes, like we do the practice observations, and Norvell shouting out Omar Graham on the field, or sometimes in the press conference his name might come up with either Fuller or somebody else. But I thought that's notable because they push really hard for a guy before spring starts. The guy doesn't respond. There were a couple of offensive tackles last year in spring that Mike Norvell circled and said this is critical for Lloyd Willis and Rod Orr, and you just didn't see that jump immediately. They said that about Omar Graham, and then Omar responded in a good way.
Khalil knows what time it is. Khalil came in the chat and gave Omar the shout out.
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a guy who could be an impact player, I think, in 2024, but he could be a rotational player this year. My only question about linebacker, and Gant leaving kind of hurts this, is when you need to cover, who is the best of that group? Kalen DeLoach, when he's healthy, absolutely can do it. Can Tatum Bethune? I think that's, as you face some of these versatile offenses, that would be where I'd say if you could find a specialist that you could put on the field that's got a bigger body, then maybe that will work.
You might see them go with one linebacker more. I mean, that is the one thing with such an experienced secondary now. You could see a scenario where you've got corners and safeties and Greedy Vance and Jarian Jones on the field at the same time, or Kevin Knowles. You know, I'm saying like you could have some of those kind of DB nickelback safeties. You could have multiple of them on the field helping out in those areas as well.
I think that's the way to go. I mean, you've got they're recruiting larger bodies at defensive back in general. Like the next wave that's coming. We talked about KJ Kirkland and Quindarius Jones, and Conrad Hussey. We'll see him along with Jabril Rawls. But if the other two are like the first two that showed up, Ira, you've got a lot of those tweeners who can help you out. Let's get back to T. Schwifty's question really quick about the over-under on the sack total. That's Patrick Payton and Verse combined, over-under 17.5 sacks. Ira, there's a couple of ways you could get to this number to answer the question, but I just want to point out, I pulled up the stats. That's what I was doing to people see me looking away. They combined for
14 last year, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
There you. Well, you already knew that. Shoot, why did I even look it up?
I mean, you know, when you write the same stories we write so much, you just kind of. But 9-5. But I would. They got a good shot to go over, man, because they're going to be. I mean, look, there's a bunch of games on the schedule where they could have sizable leads, and teams aren't going to be able to just try to keep running the ball or staying balanced. And so, yeah, I mean, you could see some games. We haven't seen them have a lot of like, I don't know if versus. I don't know. We haven't seen a lot of like 3-sack games, but I think those can come if you get a lead on some people. And last year was the first year they got a lead on a few people and they some convincing wins. But those teams really weren't even competitive. I could see them getting in some situations where they get some obvious passing downs, can really, pin their ears back and get after them.
Well, one thing, T. Swifty, I'll answer this kind of politically because the total for the team last year looks like it was 40 for the team. I think they fly way the hell over that this year because the defensive interior makes the world go round, Ira. When you have talented dudes that you can replenish in a 2 or 3 deep fashion, that's going to make everybody stronger, and it's going to wear down defensive fronts. So it wouldn't shock me if a Josh Farmer or Daryl Jackson, maybe those two and Fabian Love combined for 7 to 10 themselves. I mean, that wouldn't be shocking, would it?
No, not at all. And last year was surprising that they had as many as they did because it was, we expected a big drop off because you lost your top 2 defensive ends, Keir Thomas and Jermaine Johnson. But what they did, and Adam Fuller probably doesn't get enough credit for it, is they went heavy with blitz packages and they created sacks. I mean, I don't know how many different players had sacks. It probably was 10 different guys in that defense had sacks last year. This year, I think you might see a little bit more of it from the front 4, which could also create opportunities, for turnovers for the back end.
Khalil chiming in a bunch tonight. And thank you, Khalil. We always appreciate your commentary. They don't get another wide receiver. I think those reps for Micah can be had. Can be filled by Toafili, Jacobs, Shakai, and Wright. And Khalil also chimed in earlier saying that you don't want to hear it, but Toafili is a really important piece of the puzzle. Khalil, these are the wrong 2 guys on the screen.
We are here for it.
With Lawrence Toafili. We have long been in the camp about what Lawrence Toafili brings to the table and his versatility. And I would agree with you, Khalil, especially as a receiver. Toafili had a couple of really important catches last season when the game was in the balance and he was released just like a receiver and a catch had to be made in traffic. That dude is versatile, and I agree. He can fly over that 700 number, especially because one touch could go for 60 or 65 yards with his speed.
Yeah, and he also, one of the days that from the spring practice, a lot of the spring practice kind of blends together when you're out there every day like we are. But there was one day in particular where he had 2 catches in a row. One of them like a one-handed catch in traffic, brought it back into his body, got clobbered, held onto the ball, and it was like, okay, man, like if you're gonna make that catch, then you're gonna run between the tackles like you've been running between the tackles, and you've got that speed that he has. I think Lawrence Toafili is going to make himself some real money this year, and I think they're excited about ways to use him. And Khalil, I agree with you 100% on all those guys you talked about, slot receivers. The only question in that group really is, well, the only 2 questions I would say is Vandrevius is still a true freshman. We love what we saw in the spring, but even towards the end of the spring, he started to kind of wear down a little bit. Ron Dugan's talked about it. He said he started getting a little tired, a little lazy, trying to catch with his body, which led to some drops. So now he's got to do it in a full college football season against legitimate Power 5 defenses. We have to see how he handles that. And then Winston Wright, again, we have to see. I think Khalil said, please be 100%. We're all hoping the same thing. I mean, if he's 100%, then I don't think you worry about Micah Pittman at all. But
Yeah.
we still have to see him be 100%.
I don't think we've seen that yet. And
Yeah.
we'll let you know when we do on the Warchant observations on warchant.com after each practice. Bradley, we'll get to that in just a second. I'm going to take a quick left turn, Ira, because you brought up Ron Dugans. And Ron can be pleasantly blunt when it comes to assessments of his receivers. I noticed that in spring this year, because usually I talk to one of the defensive guys, but I talked to Coach Dugans about Johnny and his blocking. He said it wasn't Johnny. It was Micah Pittman who started the train of guys blocking. And he said, Johnny, you're 6'7". Why aren't you doing this? Look at this little guy doing it. Why can't you at the size that you are? He is very blunt and full of confidence now when he's talking about what it is Hakeem Williams needs to do, Dre Jacobs needs to do, and even some of the veterans and challenging them and making them
Yeah.
better. I mean, you've covered this start to finish, and you remember his playing career better than I do. But there's a different level of swagger with Florida State's wide receiver coach than there was a couple of years ago.
What's interesting about it is I think that's always who he is. I mean, if you think about Ron Dugan as a player, was like a tough, hard-nosed player, man, just like no quarters asked, no quarters given, really physical guy. And I think that's who he is. But I think, he comes in here in the middle of, he came in here in the middle of the
problems.
it was a disaster. The Taggart end of the Taggart regime into the Norvell regime, new coaches, roster that's not very good. Kids think about the receiver room he inherited. He's got Tamorian Terry and DJ Matthews and Warren Thompson. And it's like locker room lawyers everywhere. It was just an awful situation. So I wish I was there. Like I wish we could have been a fly on the wall to see how he tried to navigate that. But I think last year, when Mike Norvell stuck with him last year, and then I think, because remember we talked to him last year before the year, and he was pretty short. Like he had some blunt things to say about Malik McClain. Like he needs to realize that just because he started as a freshman doesn't mean he's arrived. Like he's got to get better. I kind of feel like last year when I don't say Norvell stuck with him, Norvell might have been stuck with him, but Norvell, they brought him back last year. Yeah. And I don't know if maybe Ron decided, you know what, if I got to be me.
Yeah.
Whatever happens, I got to be me. And I agree, man. The way he talks about those guys now and the way he talks to them now, I think you're seeing him, kind of trying to impart his toughness into that group. And I think it's awesome to see, man. It's great to see him get these results in recruiting now. It's great to see Chris Thompson getting these results in recruiting now. We'll see if Randy Shannon can prove people wrong. I always enjoy seeing that because I think we're so quick to judge position coaches that a lot of times I don't think it's fair.
Blake Nicholson, obviously there's a connection there with Derek Ray, but Blake Nicholson is a good start if you're trying to get that momentum where kids see other kids like them in their position groups start to go. It seems contagious. And with receiver, it's just a thing now. Florida State is going to attract. Ira, could be up to 6 guys in the 2024 class at receiver for FSU, all of them blue chips.
Right. Right.
That's 5 years worth of work in the not too long ago in terms of.
And I thought, sorry to interrupt you again, but I thought the great line in the Dexter Carter interview that we ran last week, that people, if you haven't seen it, go back and watch Dexter Carter. We talked to him for about an hour, Gene and I, about his son committing for the class of 2026.
Yep.
I think he is a wide receiver, but he's a wide receiver. Dexter Carter's son, Devin Carter, is wanted by Alabama, Georgia, everybody in the country. He's finishing his freshman year of high school. And, he said, I was uneasy about Florida State as recruiting my son because they have not put receivers in the NFL. And that goes way back before Ron Dugans. That goes back to Lawrence Dawsey. That goes back to, the end of Jimbo Fisher's tenure. So, they haven't had this caliber of player. And then when they got a high caliber player, it didn't work out for whatever reason. So, but now, like DJ Matthews or whoever. So now it's going to be interesting to see a Florida State offense with the receivers they're bringing in now. We love Vandrevius. I think Hakeem's got a really high ceiling. Goldie Lawrence is coming in this summer. The kids they've got committed for that next class, like you said, they already have 4 receivers. 3 of them are 4 stars. The one that's not a 4 star is Camden Fryer, who I've seen and is a really nice receiver. So it's fun.
I think, it's just crazy. It's an exercise we did on the JCS once, which is post the late 90s era where they're loaded with receivers, and Coach Dugans knows all about that. But if you have to list and come to put together a list of NFL wide receivers from Florida State, it's just a lot thinner of a list than you would think it would be for such a long period of time. Like when Richard Goodman is near the top of the list of guys that made it to the NFL, it's like what gives here at Florida State? But they're going to have a lot more guys to have some run with. But we all think, I think at this point, Ira, between the two freshmen, we always get questions about freshmen. If somebody's going to put up big numbers this year, it seems like Vandrevius has the better shot between him and Hakeem Williams for
Right.
this season putting production together. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Vandrevius is just he looks pretty much ready made. There's some stuff I'm sure he has to work on, but yeah, super impressive. And Hakeem, I think may have as high a ceiling or a higher ceiling, but it's just I mean, he's got to learn how to be a really complete receiver, not just a big dude who can kind of impose his will on smaller DBs like he did in high school.
Now that quietly, Hakeem had a good final week or two of camp.
He did.
As Vandrevius was starting to have maybe hit a wall, Hakeem looked a lot different at the end of camp than he did in the beginning of camp, which, I mean, when you're an early enrollee freshman, it makes a ton of sense. Briley asked a question about logistics, which is when is the next time y'all get to be around the players and the team? Curious how the roster attrition additions affect locker room chemistry and morale. That's going to be an ongoing fluid thing. The last part of that comment, Briley, I don't envy the coaches. Now, that I envy their salaries, but that's something that they're always going to have to keep an eye on because with NIL, it seems like somebody's pissed off every 5 minutes. But for us, Ira, I mean, we get to see ACC kickoff with a handful of players. We don't check out PRPs. We're not allowed to do that. I don't think they allow us into conditioning in the offseason. Am I wrong about that before they get into fall camp? I don't think we do.
Not really, no. Yeah, we probably won't be around them much, but we talk to people around the program. I don't think that's going to be a big concern. I do, again, like I wish Trayshawn Ward would have stayed. I feel like he's a great team guy. There's a couple players like that. I think you made a good point. Brendan Gant was a selfless player, really good special teams player. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be a big issue because they've got great leadership now. And this is the first time in a long time that, they've had a bunch of veterans who are really good players and also care to be great leaders. Like Jordan Travis wants to be a leader. He not only wants to be the best player, he wants to be a good leader. I think Jared Verse clearly is that guy. Jeremiah Byers is that kind of guy. I'm going to guess we don't know Braden Fisk well, but just from our interactions with him that we have had, seems like a coach kind of mentality. And then even a guy like Jaheim Bell, to me, and this is going to sound negative, but he seems like he would be like the most likely candidate to be like a mercenary. Like I'm coming in, I want to go to an offense where I can put up big numbers to go make it in the NFL because he's got that ability and he's coming into a school probably for 1 year. So you feel like that would be a concern, but because he's so focused on making the most of this year and taking advantage of this offense and being a stud player, like he's bought into whatever they wanted to do in terms of blocking. I mean, think about how far he came in terms of blocking in this spring. Well, that doesn't happen unless you want it and you want to be part of the team. So I don't think that's going to be a big concern. I don't know what your thoughts are, Tom, but I'm not trying to paint it as pie in the sky, but I think there's a lot of things in place to make me feel like that's not going to be a problem.
One of the great ways to keep your stuff together, to keep it clean, is that the depth chart, if it's loaded, you have to take part in all of these drills in order to keep your job. So if you're Kentron, or if you're Ja'Kai Douglas, or Winston Wright, or Vandrevius, or at the running back room, if you're Rodney Hill, or CJ, or Keziah Holmes, or Lawrence, and the defensive tackle group, I mean, they don't do a whole lot of hitting in the summer, but I mean, look, this is important for Braden Fisk to take reps away from a Josh Farmer and vice versa. If you're one of the corners, Ira, you're Jerion or Azarie Thomas or Kevin Noles coming off of an injury. Like you see where I'm going. Like
competition solves a lot of that. Yeah.
It does. It keeps everybody in line. If you know that you are 100% a day one starter, that night against LSU, nobody can take your job. Perhaps you can, take your foot off the gas, but they're at most positions now. This is the way that they flipped it. Now you are in a place where the competition is going to dictate the work ethic itself. And you could see that in spring camp. I thought it seemed like there was a good focus intensity up and down the lineup across pretty much every position group.
Yeah. And I just think of, when you think of the other side of the spectrum, I was just thinking, as you were talking, I was thinking back to the mid 2000s, Tom, when things weren't all that great on offense, I remember talking to a couple of older receivers who who basically were like they never practiced. They would tell the trainers they were hurt like all the time, but they knew they were always going to start
Yep.
because they were the starters, and then on top of that, they would never come out of games because they never got subbed in when the veterans ahead of them were in games.
Yep.
So like you just had this awful culture. It's no other way to say it. And again, it was towards the end of Coach Bowden's tenure where he's not as strong a control and he's relying on assistant coaches who probably aren't in as good a control as they need to be in. And so you had that situation where guys were not practicing, but they knew they'd still play and they wouldn't sub themselves out. So now they're pacing themselves in games because they want to play 70 or 80. They don't want to ever come off the field. And so
Yeah.
when you have competition, you solve that problem.
I remember that time. I went to school at Florida State at that time, so I'm all too acquainted. I thought, close games with Troy and UAB were as low as it could get for Florida State. I was wrong. Perhaps I was too entitled with 7 and 6 because it did get worse. But about 10 years later, Ira, you had a similar situation in which two smaller receivers. Sorry, folks, for making your blood boil if you go back a couple decades, but Bobo Wilson and Kermit Whitfield, they never were. Even if they did something terribly wrong, in that era of Jimbo's time,
he was not taking them out.
They were always going to play. They were, maybe because the sight adjustments, they were much better than Auden Tate. But you know what? I think I would have rather had Auden Tate on the field earlier in his career because you only got to see him for such a small window. And there were a couple other players like that. That's a great point, though, with Norvell's offense, Ira. They've got so many dudes, and he tends to like to rotate guys, whether that's a strength or a weakness. I mean, they rotate a ton of guys on offense to make sure that the touches go around, get spread around.
Yeah, and I'm really, really curious to see again from what packages they go with, what personnel they go with, how often they're going with 2 tight ends, maybe 3 tight ends. I think the way Chris Thompson talked about, and again, this was one of those coach interviews. If you can go back and watch it, if you haven't watched it, you guys don't watch enough of the coach interviews. Go back and watch the coach interviews. But Chris Thompson, he got really excited talking about what those tight ends. You got a second?
Oh no, I was going to ask you. Sorry.
No, he just got real excited talking about the tight ends and what they do for the offense.
That was me putting up like a bookmark for when you're done. Sorry,
Gotcha.
Sign language translation. Which Thompson interview was that? What part of camp?
It was the very end of camp. It's like the last day of camp when they let the assistant coaches talk.
See, what I'm going to do, Iris, I'm going to link it in the chat. You keep
nice.
expounding on your point, but I'll link it in the chat so people can.
Yeah, and it wasn't at the beginning of I think it was towards I don't know if it was towards the middle or the end, but it was during that interview, and he was talking about what having Jaheim Bell and Kyle Morlock and Marquise Douglas and these tight ends who not only are receivers but also can be blockers, and how that makes the offense so much more unpredictable for defenses to prepare for. And you could see him I could feel, and Chris Thompson's not a real emotional guy.
No.
I think that's an understatement, but I think just the way he was talking about it, you could tell this is something they probably have been talking about a lot. That I think bringing in Jaheim Bell could be just completely change the complexion of the offense, which is crazy to think because it was a really good offense.
I'm looking at now in the chat, which brings up the question, Ira, because we're all looking ahead to that game, and the link, you can find it now, folks. Check that out after this video is over. But the access that we get to the assistant coaches allows us to tell these stories and kind of put the pieces together and figure out what they want to do. Again, 2 of those first 4 games, LSU and Clemson. The situation with Clemson on the road, I think, makes you maybe a little bit more conservative in that environment. Run what you know you can run with a silent count, things like that. What do you think they want to be, Ira? Because they can be kind of whatever they want. But what do you think that when it comes down to it and it's time to define this year's Florida State football team is what? And what does it look like formationally on the field? I'm just so fascinated by that question, but maybe coming out of spring, where do you think that might go?
I think the strength of this team is still the running game. I think especially with the improvement they made in the offensive line and with Jordan Travis is a threat as a runner. I still think that's going to be, a lot of the counter and so much of what they do on the ground to set up everything else. And I think this is going to be the first time where I feel like they're going to be in a position, since Mike Norvell has been here, I believe, where when it's an obvious running situation, that it doesn't have to be any kind of eye candy. It doesn't have to be a lot of motion. It doesn't have to be tricking anybody. That I feel like with this offensive line, there's a chance they'll be able to kind of push people off the ball. And so now I think, I think they're gonna be physical, and I think then that's gonna create the opportunities in the passing game where you've got Johnny Wilson, Jaheim Bell. I just think you think about those plays where, tight ends were schemed open or receivers were schemed open, but the tight ends would get tackled after a 20-yard gain or a 25-yard gain. I mean, I think they're going to be, I just see a lot of big plays in the passing game. I think it's going to be a powerful running game. And then when the passing game hits, man, it's going to be for big plays.
There's actually one passing play in the LSU game that should have been a big hit, but it was a drop, and it was schemed wide open. I think you might
Yeah.
recall this, Ira, but
Yeah.
it's a scheme pass to Cam McDonald. And it is, you could just tell Norvell has got the defense looking to their left and looking to their right and worrying about Jordan's legs. And then it's, oh, crap, here goes the ball behind me. And it was contested. But if that's Jaheim or Kyle Morlock or even Marquise and Douglas, I think there may be a different result. And it's in those little margins that you can score an extra touchdown and create that separation, because Florida State, Ira, through 3.5 quarters, dominated that football game between the 20s. But because they didn't cash in those situations, LSU had a chance with a 2-point play if they wanted it to win the football game. This is where you could put that kind of distance between yourself and the opponent. That's the fun stuff. And I can't wait to see what their answer is. But I agree with you. I think they're going to be a lot more physical. Khalil asks in regards to the NFL draft, which happened over this weekend. And to those of you nearly 300 watching the Smash, thank you for being here. Hit the thumbs up, subscribe to Warchant TV, head over to the website to check out Ira's 321 column as well. Khalil asks, which one of the free agent signees do you think has the best chance of making the final roster? I'd say it's either Pokey Wilson because of the position or Cam McDonald because I think he got a lot better at blocking in 2022 and is a good route runner. Ira, if you had to make a candidate, the number one pick to from the undrafted free agent class to make an NFL roster, who is it?
I mean, I need to pull up the list. How many were there? There wasn't a lot. It was like 3 or 4.
There's another key one, and I see Briley commented on it. I would share this opinion, but Robert Cooper to the Seahawks, I think he's got an excellent shot.
I might go with Robert Cooper.
Not because he was our guy, right? Not because he was working at TV last year.
Well, I mean, I think he's healthy, and I think we forget what he was when he was healthy. Last year I don't think he was ever healthy, and now he had that shoulder done or whatever repair done. I think I'm going to go with him. Pokey. I like Pokey a lot. I worry about his durability at that level. But yeah, I mean, he certainly has a speed.
He's with the Chargers, and they've got durability issues. I mean, it seems like Keenan Allen every year is out for 6 out of 17 games, and Mike Williams has some problems. Guyton usually fills in for them. Maybe Pokey could be like a Guyton who comes off of the practice squad of the reserves to fill in when those guys that are starters get hurt. So there's a chance there. But I think
thanks by the way, Khalil. Appreciate that.
Yeah, also, Khalil, we do appreciate the love beyond the fact of the questions. That super chat always helps. But Big Coop being fully healthy, Ira, on both arms, it's just that hits different. And for first and second down in the NFL, you can always use a dude to plug up the run game.
Well, that's the thing. I think about remember DeMarcus Christmas.
Sure.
He played. He was in the league, I think, 3 or 4 years. Mm-hmm. And I feel like Robert Cooper. I like Robert Cooper a lot more than I like DeMarcus Christmas as a player. So I think that I think he's got a good shot.
We got the final 10 minutes or so of the Monday Smash. There was a question there about the NFL draft, so we got to that. Ira, I'm going to go back to the offense real quick. It's the PSA that I like to put out often about eye candy and tricks. The Wildcat is not eye candy, nor is it a trick, as long as you're not throwing a pass out of it. The Wildcat can be power football, and we used it a couple of years ago with Jay-Sean Corbin, in 3rd and shorts and 4th and shorts and 3rd and goals. So if you see that this year, at least personally, I don't count that as eye candy. It's when you're doing, dipsy-do dunkaroos, handing end-arounds to Micah Pittman on the half-yard line against Louisville. It's things like that drive the fans nuts.
But don't you think those situations, they're going to be able to, Mike Norvell doesn't have to be cute. That was the big complaint midway through last year was he was too cute. I think they'll be able to move the line of scrimmage, not against everybody, probably, maybe not against Clemson. I don't know. We'll have to see. But I think, and maybe not against LSU, but I think in a lot of games, they'll be able to do that. The other thing is, and we saw this in the Oklahoma game, and I think we saw it different times throughout the year, where when you ask what the offense is going to be, I think a lot of it's going to depend on what defenses want to try to take away. And the great thing about Jordan Travis and where he is right now is, man, the menu's wide open, right? Like,
Yep.
if you don't, remember 2 years ago, we felt like the recipe to stopping Florida State was like challenge the wide receivers and tell Jordan you're not going to run. Like,
Yeah.
we're not going to let Jordan Travis run the football. It's what Clemson did. A bunch of teams did it to him. Jordan, you're not going to run the football, and we dare you to try to throw to those receivers. We're going to play press man, and good luck. And Florida State had no answers. Well, now they've got answers. And so I think you'll see, Mike Norvell look at their personnel and say, okay, this is what we're going to do. And if you try to stop it, now we can. There's just so many things on the table. That's got to be such a confident feeling for a coaching staff.
I think what they're going to have to do, and it's a great question, open question about can they do it against LSU. But early on, Ira, they're going to have to prove that they can move the line. They can move the line of scrimmage and reset it in 3rd and 1 and either move the chains or score the touchdown in order to make a defense honor it. Because at that point, then Jordan's legs become that much more of a nightmare. You might have a read option called in that situation, and Jordan's just walking in. I think between the 20s, the things that you're going to see this year are wide open dudes up the seam probably early on with the H-backs. But Jordan's going to have a lot of cheapy 8 to 12-yard runs where he just runs and slides down because defenses are so concerned about everything else that's out there. You're right. A couple of years ago, it was, I'm going to single the receivers, commit all the bodies to the line of scrimmage, and good luck. Your offensive line can't even block 4 of us. So what happened? 7 of them near the line of scrimmage. And somehow Florida State schemed up the ability to hit home runs. But beyond that, it was down for down. You couldn't do a damn thing. And now every week it's going to be fascinating. It's a storyline. What does this defensive coordinator want to take away? Because Florida State can do everything. It's just, I think this season's going to be defined by what they do in short yardage and inside the 5-yard line in the red zone.
Yeah, and I think those two things, the ability to move the line on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 and be able to just impose your will is a big deal. And then if they get the place kicker situation figured out, and we'll see if that happens. Maybe Tyler Keltner will just blow us away in this preseason, or maybe Ryan Fitzgerald will respond and he'll get back to what people thought he was going to be when he signed at Florida State. But if those are two things you didn't have even last year, as much progress they made on the offensive line, I don't think they ever felt confident that they could move the line of scrimmage in obvious running or in short yard situations. Now I think maybe as the year went on, they got better about it. But I think they'll feel confident about that throughout. I mean, if you got Casey Roddick and Dimitri Emmanuel and Keandre Jones, and I mean, they got some dudes on that offense. Bless Harris. I mean, they've got some dudes that can move the line of scrimmage. And those are two things Mike Norvell didn't have at his disposal when he got down in the red zone last year.
Seminole Headlines comes up tomorrow on the channel at 1 p.m. here live, Warchant TV. I know that Jeff doesn't believe it's a big deal, but maybe you could tell me about Corey's opinion, Ira. I know we both believe that Dimitri Emmanuel getting another year is really big news.
I love it.
Very significant. I know Jeff doesn't think that as much. You know where Corey stands on that? Are we the only two that see the light on Meach?
I think the thing with Corey is, and I mean, one of the things he said early on, and he does this a lot. I mean, like this was the root of the conflict over Gerald Jackson. Like he would say, well, he's probably not going to start, but blah, 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 blah. And I was like, well, how do you know he's not going to start? And he kind of did the same thing with Dimitri Emmanuel. Like, yeah, he may not start or he probably won't start, but whatever. And it's like, I don't know, man. That he's 24. I mean, he's been in college 7 years. He's a grown ass man, like literally. And he knows this offense. He's played for Alex Atkins for this long. Alex Atkins wanted to bring him back because of what he can do. Yeah, man, I like Dimitri Emmanuel. I think I think it's a huge deal. And he may start, he may not, but I think I don't think those guys are down. I just think that they're so excited about the transfers that came in. But I don't know, man. Meach may be the guy. Dimitri and Maurice Smith, like those two guys have some stuff to them. And that's valuable.
Oh, I think that's my number one concern, actually, beyond safety. Safety has now become a critical issue because of the last week's worth of departures. But that's my number one concern is the second option at center behind Maurice Smith. I'll even concede that Mo might be the guy who's snapping the football because he does so well. He's technically sound. This coaching staff has wanted to find perhaps a bigger body to fill that role. I think that's why Caden Lyles was brought in. I think that's why Casey Roddick was brought in. And when he was asked where he's going to work, he mentioned center pretty early in that discussion. But my concern, Ira, is who the hell's number two? If you have to be without Maury Smith for a quarter against LSU, what's the solution there? I don't know that they have a great one. And that's where in these big games,
Yeah.
you could get tested in that one wrong area and it could prove to be the difference.
Well, here's the thing. I would say this about Casey Roddick. That transition to learning to play center, if you've never really played it before, is not something you're going to pick up in a week or two. I mean, like maybe if you're just a savant. But I think the fact that what we saw of him in the spring is probably not fair to judge. I want to see what he looks like in preseason because a big part of the reason he wanted to come here was I think he wanted to see what he could do at center. And I think he knows that with his body type, if he can be a center, like he could be highly coveted at the next level. So I think that's that. I think we're at the beginning stages of that process. We'll see what he looks in preseason. If he doesn't get any better, if he just can't do it for whatever reason, it's probably Darius Washington. And I don't think that's where you want to be, but I don't know that that's the worst second team center you could possibly have. And so and then I want when we move on for that, can we just go back to that question Khalil had about Braden Fisk? But if you want to chime in more about that.
Sure. One thing. So, once we get going about the offensive line, it's funny, Ira, this chat does something that it never did on the boards or in social media in Florida State's history. It feels like they list more names and saying, how about this guy playing instead of that guy? Right. Instead of decrying how awful it is up front, they actually list other names and say, I think this guy's better. So I'm seeing discussion in the chat right now about tackles, for example, and Bless Harris and Robert Scott. I still think after watching spring camp that Robert Scott is your best option at left. Personally, that doesn't mean that Bless Harris is bad, but I think those two are the guys that are going to be primary at tackle with maybe Byers and Armella in that second wave, and Byers maybe in tier 2 by himself, and then Armella maybe just a hair behind. What do you make of the tackle position and where we're going to be going into fall camp with it?
Yeah, I think that's where they're at right now. Assuming Robert Scott, when he gets back healthy, he was held out in the spring. Mike Norvell announced that at the beginning of the spring that he wasn't going to be available. So but I think those two guys, when healthy, I think are your top two tackles. Byers is interesting because he came to Florida State with the idea, I think, that he was going to try to play tackle, right? Like he had played guard, or I guess he played some of both,
or both, yeah, a little bit of both,
and so I think he wanted to play guard, but then he ended up playing mostly tackle. And he even said that he's working mostly at right tackle. So that's the other one, like with Roddick, I don't know where they are in that process. Like, was the idea get him out there and tackle all spring, then spend the entire offseason on learning guard, and then see what that looks like in preseason? I just don't know. I don't know what Alex Atkins' thought process was there. But, if he's a tackle, I think he's probably – it's something to say, though, man. Like it's crazy to say that a guy was all conference at his previous school and has played a lot of football, is probably your second teamer, but he probably is. And then, Armella right there behind him. For sure.
Last question before we get to Khalil's. Marty 2.0. What happened to that kid from Wisconsin who was hurt last year? That was Caden Lyles. He's no longer with the team. He sat out the year. He was a great teammate, somebody who was around the offensive line room, both in the meeting room and on the field every practice, Ira, but he decided not to pursue a hardship, I guess, at Florida State.
His body just broke down. He's had so many surgeries that when he blew out his knee at the start of last preseason camp, I wrote a feature on him during the season or at the end of the season. His body he just couldn't stay healthy. So he wanted to get into coaching. So Florida State's coaching staff let him be like kind of a student coach last season while he rehabbed, and he actually got a GA job. I'm sure Florida State helped him, but he got a GA job out west somewhere. So he's in coaching now, and I think he's a real smart kid. I think this year was good for him, even though he didn't get to help on the field, because I think it got him in his journey of coaching.
Link in the chat now of Ira's article on Caden Lyles from late December of 2022. That Google thing, it's amazing how fast you put the right search terms pop stuff up. Right. Khalil's question, this will be the final one for us tonight on Monday Smash. Thank you so much to all the 300 plus over the course of the hour that checked in. Please throw us a like underneath the video. Helps us find more FSU fans. And the talk is only going to get louder this offseason. But Ira, we return to the final question of the night from Khalil, who is a supporter and a super chat way tonight too. Thank you, Khalil. Me personally, I have to see Fisk play before I assume he's better than any of the defensive tackles that participated in spring. Maybe you guys have seen something that's worth the hype, though. Ira, your comment.
So you guys were talking about defensive tackles today on the Jeff Cameron show, right? Like, you guys came up with a theory of we should pick seed them like 1 through 4 or 5 or 6?
Yeah, because you got actually it was on the heels of your phone interview, which was a
Okay,
wonderful one, and that's its own video right now on Warchant TV. Ira, that's another way to plug it.
nice.
We decided, for the Warchant Top 40 was what came up at the end because you brought up how Travis J has always been in the
He's-
Warchant Top 40. He might have more appearances on the Top 40 than snaps in the last
that's-
18 months. But I was saying to Jeff, if you had to order those four guys right now for that list, how would you do it? And that's not an easy answer. So that's where it came from. But what do you think?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's fascinating, man. That defensive tackle position is it's loaded. Again, thankfully, things worked out the way they did with Josh Farmer last week. Yeah, I mean, I think to me, Fabian Lovett's at the top of the list, no question. Um, I'm kind of with Khalil, man. Braden Fisk has to prove it.
Yep.
We know he's an athlete. We know that. And we know he was productive at Western Michigan. I mean, you look his stats for a defensive tackle to have his stats at any level. I don't care that it was Western Michigan. That's impressive. It speaks to a motor. It speaks to effort and ability to, 50 something tackles and a bunch of tackles for loss and just chasing plays down is impressive. Because you got to assume they were running away from him. I doubt teams were like lining up against Western Michigan and say, let's run at that guy.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
So I think, he's impressive. We've seen the speed. So there's nothing to be disappointed by. But yeah, man, he's below those other guys, I think, until he proves it. Because first of all, let's see if he can hold up. He's not, he's not quite as big as a Gerald Jackson. I don't know if he's got. I just think that's and how he handles Power 5 linemen play after play after play, snap after snap, game after game when he's never done that before. So to me, Braden Fisk should have the biggest chip on his shoulder in that room to prove himself. But he may end up being one of the top 2 or 3. But I think he starts the preseason, probably 4th on that list, right?
Yeah, it has to be just because it's an incomplete grade. He's 6'5", 305 is the listing. He carries the weight extremely well.
Right.
He's athletic as hell. He's quick. He's got good footwork. But he's wearing a green jersey, not because he's at Notre Dame, Khalil. It's because that means it's no contact. So, there's only so much you can learn. He's going to get the best shot of anybody in this situation with that rotation to prove what he can do because he's not coming to Florida State to be a 65 or 70 snap defensive lineman. He's going to be in that rotation. So I think that helps. But Khalil, generally speaking, I agree with you. He's going to have to prove it. And to David Hall's follow-up question, which is, could Fisk be used at defensive end kind of like the way he was used at Western Michigan? Absolutely. This is, again, something we touched on earlier, that Adam Fuller is willing to put a lot of interior guys on the field at the same time. At least he's speaking that out loud when he's talking to the media. Braden Fisk would be one of those candidates to be that type of player. To me, Ira, he looks like at the very least in third and passing, he could have an effect like a DeMarcus Walker where he's just too quick for a guard. And, if he's got to make one guy miss instead of Phil against the run, he looks like he's got the quicks. But you just don't know how somebody's going to hold up until they see D1 linemen week in, week out, to your point. The best thing I can say, Khalil, would be the offer list. The schools that were interested in bringing him in outside of Florida State would be the best indicator of his ability. But nothing he saw in camp.
Yeah, it seemed like everybody thought for sure because he's originally from Indiana. Everybody was sure he was going to go to Notre Dame. Yep. And I think the fact that Florida State won that battle speaks to a lot of things, but one of them might have been how he's going to be used. Like he might have liked the plan that they have for him and the fact that, they do have those other guys who can be more space eaters. So yeah, it's going to be, we'll have to see, but yeah, I think there's one thing about Braden Fisk that I think rubs people a little bit the wrong way is that he was proclaimed the number 1 defensive tackle in the transfer portal. I think he was number 1 or number 2.
Yes, correct.
And so there was this immediate hype. But I think the one thing we've all come to realize is those portal rankings are not quite the same as normal recruiting rankings because it's what's based on what's in the portal. And so, the top elite players in the country, the defensive tackles at Clemson and Alabama and Georgia and LSU, those guys are not in the portal. So, he's not ranked ahead of those guys. But I think there's a perception that, oh my gosh, we got the number 1 defensive tackle in the country. You got the number 1 guy in the portal. And, but I think they're going to use him well. And you love his you love the motor. I mean, I think that's gonna play. I mean, think how many plays Jermaine Johnson made from behind.
Yep.
I mean, that's if you're going to play down there, man, a big part of it is how much you're going to hustle and run down plays, even when they don't come your way.
No excuses when you got that kind of rotation too.
Yeah.
If he's got 80% of the strength of Darrell Jackson, Florida State's going to be in a good place because that other transfer, it wasn't the number one D tackle in the portal, Ira. Very impressive from a strength standpoint, Darrell Jackson from Miami. We're going to wrap it up on this note. Thank you to all of you who watch Monday Smash. Remember, Wake Up Warchant, always available. It'll be on the channel here overnight into tomorrow. Aslan and Corey's thoughts on latest happenings around Florida State. 1 o'clock tomorrow. Seminole headlines live here on Warchant TV. What will Ira Schoffel be watching the most of in the next 2 weeks? Will it be the NBA playoffs, the Baltimore Orioles?
Baltimore Orioles, baby.
Stanley
You can
Cup?
stop. You can stop.
Okay.
It's not the Stanley Cup. Who's even what? I mean, who's even is the Maple Leafs? Is that what I don't even know?
Beat Tampa. Thanks a heap. They eliminated my Lightning, but downstairs in about 10 minutes, I'll have a very loud spouse because her Rangers are playing in Game 7 against the Devils. It's must-see TV, Ira. You got to watch Rangers Devils tonight.
So now you're all invested for her. Like you got to carry the torch. You got to.
I've got a disgusting New York Rangers polo shirt. It's absurd. It looks like something that you'd see a guy wear. Well, I won't go that far, but it is nasty. I said, babe, I'll wear Rangers stuff as long as it's absurd, and it's just this giant logo on a polo. It looks like it was made in 1994.
Can I plug a couple stories I've got coming up, Tom?
Please do. Please plug the website, Ira. Please get me off the New York Rangers topic.
So I have a softball story coming, folks. Florida State softball. They're playing the Gators on Wednesday. I'm hoping to have this story up before that game. I've been working on it for a while. Got to put it off by portal stuff, but that story's coming. It's an interesting story, behind the scenes story about FSU softball, kind of part of their secret sauce and what's made them so successful. They're incredible. And then I've got a football coaching staff story. I'm not going to give too much away about it, but it's about some members of the support staff, and it's a really cool story. I think people are going to love it. Maybe it'll be up later this week, but it's a really cool story. So keep checking out warchant.com even when we don't have videos going live on the channel.
Great deal that'll get you through all of camp too, through August 31st, $29.99. Head over to warchant.com right now and check out the channel for more content like the Chris Thompson video we linked and others. For Ira Schoffel, my name is Tom Lang. Hit that thumbs up on the way out, everybody. Subscribe to Warchant TV. Thanks for watching the Smash. Thank you to Director Ben, and we will talk to you all next time on Warchant TV.